on the honor system in terms of managing our own microphones and unmuting if you have a question to ask. I think that tends to work well. I don't envision us stepping on each other's toes too much with this small of a group. We don't have anyone who's requested language translation, so the entire session will be in English. By way of introductions, and actually before I get into introductions, just a little more housekeeping. I'll go ahead and share my screen and pull up what I assume brought you all here today, which was the flyer advertising today's topic of home and community-based services as it relates to the self-determination program. And I trust that all of you had the opportunity to check out the orientation offered on Alta's LMS, the Learning Management System, which does require creating an account, then logging back in with those credentials and searching to find the self-determination program orientation that runs about an hour and a half, says an hour and 15 minutes if you click through pretty quickly. It could be an hour and a half if you contemplate between slide sessions. The other thing I like to point out is each of these 8 sessions that we're hosting of Q&A has a designated topic, but the end will be kind of an open forum for anything related to SDP, question and answer. But we do hope that you've gotten a basic overview of the program from this orientation. The other thing that's not intuitive is that in order to attend each of these sessions, it requires registration for each session separately. We did that intentionally because if someone does select a language translation preference, we want to make sure we plan to bring the appropriate translator, schedule for their availability, make sure they're in attendance, and we just couldn't do that for every single language for every single session unless there was a need identified. So that does require registration for each of these sessions separately, independently. If you enjoyed today's session, which I hope you will, we'll hope to see you back for our future sessions. With that, I will go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker today. And this is really not intended to be Catherine speaking at you. It's Catherine bringing her expertise to the table for hopefully some engaging dialogue, question and answer, learning from each other. She is our foremost expert on the topic of home and community-based service waiver, compliance with the final rule put forth by CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, that dictates how those federal funds can be used to purchase services for clients of the regional center in both the traditional system when the date falls upon us, and immediately for anyone receiving services through self-determination program. So Cathie Weston is with us. We'll turn the floor over to her to begin, but we also have Tracy Brown, one of our 3 associate directors of case management services, and Heidi Dilley, client services manager up in our Grass Valley office serving the Grass Valley Auburn communities. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Catherine. I'll mute myself and take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Herman. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here. I'm going to introduce myself and give you a little overview of my role at the Regional Center. But before I do that, I do want to invite you, if you are so bold, you're welcome to unmute yourself, take off your, share your video so that we can see one another's faces. And this is designed as a question and answer session. So I'm hoping that we can enjoy a conversation with one another. I'd like to get to know you, get to hear your questions, and I want to invite you, if you've got questions, comments, you want to jump in, please don't feel that you have to wait until I'm done. This is not a big presentation, but I'd hope to share some information with you guys that may be of interest and maybe spark some questions as we go. So to give you a little background about myself, I am Cathie Weston. My role is the Home and Community-Based Services Specialist here at Alta Regional Center HCBS for short, because that is a bit of a mouthful. So my role is basically to be the point person at our regional center for anything having to do with implementation of the CMS final rule, which was a change to Medicaid regulations that were adopted in 2014. And we've been in quite a process of educating ourselves, getting to know what does this mean for us, for our providers, doing a lot of training with our staff, the providers, the community, working with our service providers to make some changes, and looking forward to how this is going to impact self-determination program. So the final rule, if you are not familiar with it, says that regional center services that are considered HCBS, home or community-based, should be supporting people to experience the full benefit of community life. In the past, as you know, many people have not had that opportunity to participate in the community and have even been segregated because of their disability or diagnosis. So now people do have rights, including full inclusion in the community, including employment, if that's something they're interested in doing, planning that is person-centered, to have rights be respected, to grow in independence at home as well as in the community, and to make choices about how they spend time, what they do, and who they spend time with. Many of these have already been in place in California with the Lanterman Act, but now there will be more accountability to make sure these are happening well, and not just here, but also across the country. So currently, Alta is looking at vendored group services such as day programs and care homes to determine if their services are in compliance with those requirements. I'm taking a closer look specifically because those are typically services provided in a congregate setting or in groups rather than one-on-one in an individualized way. If changes do need to be made, providers have about 2 years to update their services to come into compliance if they're going to continue to qualify for federal funding. So over the past year, I'm sure you're aware, COVID has slowed us down a little bit, but I think we've learned a lot about the incredible value of relationships and being connected and being part of our communities, as well as the benefit of individualized services. So I think that the self-determination program will be an even more important option as we're navigating life with COVID and then in the future going past COVID. So for those participating in the self-determination program, the Regional Center has been given the requirement to ensure that any services funded through SDP are in line with these final rule requirements. So I can share with you guys maybe a more in-depth explanation of what some of those requirements are. I can share with you guys about the process of assessment for the SDP participants, service providers. We've got some resources to share with you guys, some different websites to share. I think Herman may be able to put those in the chat for us, hopefully. And of course, the questions. Hopefully we can answer any questions that you have. So at this point in our talk, would anyone like to share maybe any questions they have, anything that's been burning on your mind you'd like to ask?
I have a question if nobody else does.
Great.
I'm Karen Mulvaney. I'm dialing in today under my daughter's name, Lauren Pierce, and she's a Regional Center client. And so we have a number of folks here listening in. One of my questions was for self-determination. Well, under regular HCBS rules, there are certain conditions when like a setting is presumed to be compliant. Mm-hmm. And if you have an existing service provider that is already in business providing services to the general community, is there going to be a similar kind of presumed compliant analysis that applies to, you know, those kinds of self-determination services, or do they have to go through the whole gamut of HCBS?
Yes,
evaluation?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So while the final rule requirements do apply to all of our providers funded through HCBS waiver, which is pretty much all of our regional center vendors, we're taking a closer look at those ones that are in congregate settings that are designed specifically for individuals with disabilities and doing that closer assessment with them because there may be some more challenges when people are providing those services in groups. So similar to our vendor assessments, with the SDP service providers, we would also presume if it's an individualized service, maybe you have someone, you know, a family friend, a neighbor that's providing an individual support. It's one-to-one, it's individualized, that should meet all the requirements, definitely. It's definitely good to be aware just to make sure, hey, are we incorporating all these things? Yeah, good to know. But it's where there may be a site that's controlled by the provider. There may be group services. It's specific for maybe regional center clients specifically. That's where we would want to come in and take a closer look with the support of the service coordinator.
Okay. And just a quick suggestion, if we ever do this series again, I just listened to the orientation this morning, and I don't believe the term HCBS is actually in the orientation. It's referred to as final rule. So you might want to just modify the title of this Q&A topic if we do this again, to include final rule HCBS whenever we get to that point. Thanks.
Good, thank you. Great, anybody else?
I have a question. Because I was reading on one of the slides about vendor versus non-vendor. So if you have a non-vendor service, how do you know if they meet the final rule, or what is the process if you want to access a non-vendor service?
Sure. So you're fading out a little bit, but I think I got the gist of your question. How do you know if someone is compliant with the final rule? So I would encourage you to talk with the service coordinator, talk about your plans for the service, where the service is going to be taking place, how it's going to be provided. As I said, if it is going to be in a group or on a site that the provider controls, such as maybe it's a vendor day program, but they're going to be accessing it through the self-determination funding. There's a tool that I've developed for the service coordinators to use to review with those service providers. If there's a site, I'll join the service coordinator in reviewing the site to see, are there any changes that we might need to make to the proposed service so that we can make sure it is compliant for this planning team going forward. But I would say the best tools that you have is to familiarize yourself with the rights under the CMS final rule. And I can go into those in a little bit more detail if you guys are interested. I won't do the 2-hour version.
That would be great. I would like to know more just because I'm looking at a service that is not vendored by the regional center.
Yeah. Across the board, I always say, is this something that's going to be supporting the goals and desired outcomes of the planning team? Are people being told, yes, you can pursue your goals and here's how we're going to support you? Or is it, no, you can't do that. No, we'll do that for you. No, we don't have the ratio for that. If there's any reason you're being told no, that's something to maybe push back against a little bit and ask why. Why is that? So we always want to make sure that people's needs are being met and to find a way to implement the IPP in a way that fits with regulations, of course. But let me go through this and hopefully it'll give you guys the flavor. You don't have to memorize all these, but I think you'll get a sense of what kinds of things we would be looking for. And I think you will also see a theme of person-centered practices, person-centered planning running through these. If we were going to try and put out an expectation that the whole country is going to be providing person-centered services, how would we put that into federal language? This is kind of what's been come up with. And it's broad enough that it can be individualized and hopefully specific enough to keep us on track. So here we go. The first one says that the setting is integrated in and supports full access of individuals receiving these services to the greater community to the same degree of access as individuals not receiving the services. So for our context, because the final rule does apply to bigger than just our system, but saying that people with disabilities have the same rights as people without disabilities, right? Regional center clients have the same right to participating in community, the same opportunities for being involved in community life. And the fact that there is a need for support shouldn't segregate them or separate them from being participants in their community. So that includes recreation, it includes working, volunteering. It also includes services such as haircuts, going to the gym, going to the doctor. We have those services available to all of us, you and I. And in the past, we might have seen maybe someone living on a a care home site or maybe back in the institutional setting, where all of those services will be brought to them. We'll bring the doctor to you. We'll bring the, we'll do your own haircuts here. And people were never leaving their residence and never being a part of the community at large. So we don't want to see providers duplicating something that is available to everybody in the greater community. We want to see providers supporting people to access the community in a safe way, right? The next one is that the setting is selected by the individual from among setting options, including non-disability specific settings and an option for a private unit in a residential setting. So there should be choice, right? People should have discussions with their team about what they want to do and what are the different options and choices available to how those goals can be met. Where do you want to live? What kind of people do you want to live with? Do you want to have roommates? Do you want to live in your own room? Do you want to be with other people with disabilities, or do you want to be, not limited to a certain demographic? It really depends, based on each individual. So having the conversations and then documenting that in the IPP as part of that plan to show the support that we do have in place does fit with what that person's actual goals and desired outcomes would be. So an example I give sometimes is in relation to work. If someone says, I want to make some money, I want a job, the service coordinator might discuss the possibility of working with Department of Rehabilitation, which is a community agency that works with people to get jobs in the community, right? Well, not everyone is ready for a full-time job necessarily. A lot of us come out of high school, maybe we're getting some volunteer work experience, maybe we're still trying to figure out what is it that I want to do, what am I good at, maybe I want to get some more school under my belt. So someone might choose to go to a day program, or maybe not sure, but recommended, if you attend this day program, you'll be able to gain some skills that will benefit you well and help you to do better in the workplace when you're hired, because we want people to be successful, right? We don't want to set anybody up to fail. So having some time to prepare, to gain skills, so that when we do get to that point of working with DOR, it's going to be absolutely successful. That's a progression that makes sense. So we need to see that in the IPP plan. Right? If we just see, I want to work, but I'm in a day program, that's not a fit, right? But if we see, I want to learn these pre-employment skills, I want to develop some job skills, I want to explore what different kind of career options are open to me. And next year, when I've been doing that, then I'm going to apply to DOR, but I know that's my ultimate goal now. Now it all makes sense and it all works together. So we want to have some clear expectations with the planning team, make sure those conversations are happening and also getting documented as well. All right, number 3, the setting ensures an individual's rights of privacy, dignity, and respect, as well as freedom from coercion and restraint. And this is where I like to stop and remind people, even though we have a couple of years for everybody to come into compliance and make some necessary changes and update program designs and that kind of thing, we're not waiting until 2023 to be respecting people's rights and to respect dignity, and we're definitely not restraining people. So what we can be doing now, we definitely are. People who are updating their program designs, they've got a couple years to do that, but the final rule definitely is in place now. And this is something that we're promoting at this time. So that could be relating to all aspects of people's choice, how they want to live their life, how they want to dress. Do they have privacy in their bedroom? Do they have choice about where they go and what they do, and being supported even even when people don't necessarily agree with every decision, but let's talk about this. How can I support you? And let's talk about maybe some possible consequences of these decisions. What are some possible outcomes? How can we encourage you to make healthy decisions without imposing that on you, because we're respecting your right to make choices. Number 4, the setting optimizes but does not regiment individual initiative, autonomy, and independence in making life choices, including but not limited to daily activities, physical environment, and with whom to interact. There's a lot in there. The way I kind of boil it down is to see, is there anything that staff are doing for participants or residents that they could possibly be doing for themselves with some additional training perhaps, or accommodations, depending on what physical things they may need to be able to access or do this activity, but how can we be promoting independence? How can we be encouraging people to take initiative and autonomy in their own lives? It's so important, and it can be a challenge when people have grown up receiving support, or service providers feel that I'm here to help, I'm here to do things, and well, we're here to support, not to do for, if it's not something that someone needs them to do it for them. Lot there. Number 5, facilitating.
Catherine,
Yes,
can I
sure.
interject just 1 second? Just for those who might be more visual learners or benefit from having the language that Catherine's quoting from and then explaining further, the 4th link in the chat is a hyperlink to the PDF document, where on page 2 in the right-hand column, we've got the 10 rules related to settings, if people would like to follow along. And I could also do a screen share and pull that up. So that's the visual, and then people can adjust the view themselves as to whether they prefer to focus on Catherine as the speaker or the visual aid. And if anybody needs any Zoom support on how to adjust a view to see a split screen of a speaker and a shared screen, don't hesitate to ask. Sorry to interrupt, Catherine.
No, that's a great idea. Thank you, Herman.
Let me open that link.
Yes, DDS put together this fabulous resource. On one side, it says for providers. The other side, it says for consumers and families. Just a great summary of what the final rule says and what it means for people's services. So I find this to be a very handy summary of what the regulations say, rather than diving into federal regulation code on the internet. So we were on number 4 there. Now we're on number 5, right? So the setting facilitates individual choice regarding services and supports and who provides them. Now, the regional center services are voluntary. Any services being provided are voluntary. And so nobody should be feeling that they're forced into any particular service, location, or being forced to work with anyone that they're not comfortable with. If I need assistance in the restroom or taking a shower, I might be more comfortable with a female assisting me than a male staff. And so if I can express that, the service provider should be honoring that request. If I'm in a place that I'm not happy, then my service coordinator should be working with me to help me find something that would better meet my needs. So it's really about the individual, the choices, and how those relate to the services that are being provided. So the next few on here relate to residential settings specifically. And while that doesn't always necessarily apply to all of you, you may know somebody who is in residential care in the future, and this might be good for you to know in case you hear them reference anything relating to these. So I'll review these really quickly for you guys as well. So number 6 talks about the unit being a specific place that can be owned, rented, or occupied under a legally enforceable agreement. And for the purposes of our vendored care homes, we look to the admissions agreement that the regional center completes with the planning team upon admission. So I really recommend that the planning team take time to review what is in that agreement. Don't just flip to the end and sign on the dotted line. You know, it can feel like a lot of fine print sometimes, but really make an effort to discuss, you know, to the best of everybody's understanding, what are the expectations that you can have of the service provider? What are they going to be doing for you? And also what is expected of the resident, right? Because there may be expectations of people's behavior or participation that people should be aware of as much as possible, if that could potentially be lead to them being asked to leave the home in the future. We never want to see somebody being evicted or asked to leave their home without really trying to work it out and understanding, how can we make this work? Do you need training? Do you need additional support here? But we don't want anyone feeling like they're just being booted. This is their home. We want to make sure that everybody that's on the planning team is signing the admission agreement, and that a copy of that signed agreement is in people's charts as well. Number 7, each individual has privacy in their sleeping or living unit, including doors lockable by the individual, choice of a roommate if sharing a unit, and the freedom to furnish and decorate their sleeping or living units within the lease or other agreement. So people do have the right to a private room if that's what they prefer. Now, at this time, we have previously vendored many care homes that have shared bedrooms available. Those are still going to be available. Some people prefer to have roommates. If someone would like to have a single room, they can request that and talk to their service coordinator. This is not a requirement that every home offer a single room at this time, although our regional center practice now is that any future homes being vendored would be vendored with single rooms available. If someone did prefer, no, I really do want to have a roommate, that would absolutely be supported, but we would want to make sure if they decided to separate, there would still be enough rooms in the home that they could have that private space. Having doors lockable, that's a new one, and this one sparked a lot of questions when we were first learning about this. So that includes both individual bedroom doors as well as bathroom doors. We're not locking people into the house. This is people who would like some privacy in their bedroom and would like to lock the door. Maybe they're in there changing their clothes, don't want to be interrupted. Maybe they're sleeping and they don't want the roommate to come in and, or housemate to come in and turn on the light. Maybe they're going to be going away for work for the day and they want to leave the room locked behind them so they know that people won't be going and getting into their things. So there can be keys for the appropriate staff to have a copy just in case of emergency. We're not going to be putting anybody's safety at risk there, but to have that safety, security, and privacy is something that is guaranteed. If people would like to keep their doors unlocked, that's their choice. If they would like to keep it open, that's their choice. But if they want to have it locked, that is something that they have the option to do as well. So I've been encouraging people, not everyone is accustomed to using a key. It might take some practice. That's okay. There may be some training that would be helpful there. Maybe a metal key is not ideal for everybody, but there are other options, right? There's card keys like hotel room doors. There's the number punch pads that you could do and just memorize the code. And I've even heard of biometric door locks where you put your thumb on it and it reads your fingerprint. I think that sounds pretty cool. Probably not cheap, but it might be effective. So what can we do to make it work for this individual? All right, choice of a roommate. If you do have a roommate, how do you express your choice? If you would like to change roommates, what is the process for the service provider to assist you in changing roommates? That should be something that everybody's aware of. And freedom to furnish and decorate sleeping or living units within the arrangement there. So, if this is your home, this is your room, it should reflect your personality, your style, what you need to be comfortable in your own space. And if that means bringing in your own furniture, decorating with your own art, that should be totally supported. All right, individuals have the freedom and support to control their own schedules and activities and have access to food at any time. We really don't want to see that people are being denied access to food. Food is such a fundamental need and right, and has such an impact on our quality of life to have access to the food that's important to us. And to be able to control your own schedules. Maybe you prefer to eat early, maybe you prefer to eat late, right? That's your choice. If you prefer to go to day program during the day, great. If you prefer to sleep in and then get a job at night, that's your choice to have that kind of schedule if that's what you prefer to do. So we're going to support that. Next, the setting would allow individuals to have visitors of their choosing at any time. So we're doing away with posted visiting hours. This used to be standard, right? Like no visitors past 8 p.m. You may have a visitor in your home at any time that you choose. This is not necessarily the right of the visitor to approach the door at 3 a.m. and say, hey, let me in, I want to see so-and-so, even though they're sleeping. But if someone would like to have a guest late into the evening or even overnight, that's something that is not prohibited by licensing. It's not prohibited by the regional center. This is something where we're going to support people with their social life with family and friends. And then finally, number 10, the setting is physically accessible to the individual. So we're not blocking different parts of the house. That's not for you, that's not for you. It's your home. And as much as possible, keeping in mind there are licensing requirements of locking up toxic chemicals and that kind of thing, but how can we make this as accessible as possible? Yes, we're going to have wheelchair ramps if needed, or shower bars, or the non-am accessible showers, that kind of thing, but we can get creative as well in how to improve access and independence to everybody. So one of the examples that I really like to share was from a day program, actually, but it could apply in a home too, where an individual who used a wheelchair toured this day program and was considering attending. And at the end of the tour, would you like to attend? Yeah, I think so. I think I like it, but there's one thing I would need to ask before I would agree. Okay, what's that? I will only agree to come to program if you will install a bidet on the toilet. Never seen a day program with a bidet in the toilet. Well, this gentleman knew that if he had a bidet in the toilet, he would be able to care for all of his hygiene needs himself independently and not rely on staff. He would be independent and not have that invasive care. And so I'm very glad to report they immediately said, of course, we'd be happy to install that for you. So they went on, I think, Groupon and got a 2-for-1 deal. So they put one in the men's room and one in the women's room. And now the whole program has access to these wonderful bidets. So I think we're going to have the most European regional center in the state. And so the program is going to save a ton of money on wipes. People are going to be more independent. It was really a win-win-win-win situation all over the place. So wherever there's a need, how can we be creative in promoting access and independence for those individuals? So it's really being person-centered, right? What does that individual need? What are their goals? What kind of support do they need to get there? Respecting people's choices. It all fits together pretty well. And I think with self-determination, it's going to be really well suited to putting these things in place. But it's good to know too, you know, if you end up working with somebody who might have a perspective of maybe with someone with a disability needs a lot of care and supervision despite their ability, but just because of their diagnosis, there may be some training needed there. No, they're going to set the agenda. This is their choice. This is their goal. And this is your role as the support person. So it's just going to be case by case. And we really want to make sure that any needs that are present are supported with a plan from the whole planning team through that IPP process. We're never going to have an individual provider saying, well, I'm not going to let you do that, or you have to do that. If there is a health and safety need present, the team will talk together about what is the strategy we're going to use as a team. Now we're going to implement it together. So I think it's nice. It keeps everybody on the same page. It also takes the pressure and liability off of an individual provider who I think would say no to a lot of things just because they were afraid if something happens and it's all my fault, right? So kind of a better safe than sorry approach, meaning that a lot of people didn't get to take some opportunities in their lives. So having those plans, having those conversations, documenting well in the IPP. Now with self-determination, you're going to have that person-centered planning process. I think you're going to have that opportunity to dive in deep and really talk through a lot of these things. This can give you a lot of ideas about things to include. All right, any questions on any of those? Yes, Nancy, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sure. So can you hear me? Because I have
Yes.
the headphone on. Okay. I have to say, I don't want to overshare everything, but we're new to the regional center. My son is older, but was only recently diagnosed with autism. And so we really haven't had an opportunity to use any services from the regional center. And I noticed that the budget for the self-determination program is based on prior services and prior budget, but we have nothing in our pockets essentially, and a lot of the things that are available currently aren't necessarily appropriate or helpful for his voyage in life. But we do have some things that we want to pursue that would help him, you know, going from teen to young adulthood. And the self-determination program sounds very much like what would help him in that process. So how do we use services when we have no budget?
So I do want to assure you that it is based on the individual's need, right? And so for people who have been with the regional center, it is kind of a streamlined way to identify need and services used by looking at what's been used in the past. But we know that people are going to be coming in brand new, newly eligible, maybe they move in from out of state. That is definitely going to happen. So there is a process for that. Any other supervisors want to jump in and share your experience there with any more details for people coming in without a prior budget in place?
I can briefly speak to that. Definitely, Nancy, you're not alone. So we always have new clients coming in, recently being assessed for our services, or people who are moving up here, or we have a lot of clients who have not had services before because there haven't been services that were able to meet their needs. So when you're together with the planning team doing that person-centered plan, you'll be looking at what the unmet needs are for your son and developing the budget with your team based on that. And then eventually your budget will get certified. So it's kind of looking at what we could have provided that wasn't provided, or what we would have normally been providing. And we estimate what that would have been, the cost, and then that gets included in your budget as an unmet need. I don't know if Herman or Tracy want to elaborate on that. And then I would also encourage you to tune into our next presentation as well, which is also, I think, going to be about the budget process and how that all works.
Great.
And I don't want you to be discouraged. I think there's definitely some freedom when you're coming in with that blank slate of, well, what are the goals? What are the dreams? And we're not already accustomed to, well, I had this service code and that service code, but you could really make it about your son and what his goals are. And then what kinds of supports do you see being really helpful for him to meet those goals?
And that's something that's a process we go through with our service coordinator. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
We're really new. So
well, you're in good hands.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Good. Any other questions?
Looks like we've got a question in chat from Sin, who asked kind of a similar scenario, where it speaks about not necessarily being new to the regional center, but someone's needs changing as a result of reaching the age of majority, entering adulthood, perhaps exiting school. And what Heidi sort of touched on is one of two circumstances, well, situations that can result in a change in a budget calculation. That would be unmet needs. The second scenario being a change in circumstances. So certainly regional centers, we know, spend less, fewer POS dollars on our client population when their needs are being met through generic resources like the school district. Looking at what people can be doing during the day with their time to be active, productive, contributing members of society. Most people under the age of 18 are in school. Special education continues through age 22, unless you get a diploma, at which point the regional center can then step in and begin examining what your goals are for how you're going to be that productive member of society. And the self-worth and the productivity that most people find joy and fulfillment in, Catherine alluded to employment. And there is an employment first policy. So every planning team, regardless of the degree of disability, should really be looking at what is this person's career interest? How are they going to earn an income? And much like all the rest of us in society, be a contributing member. And we've got some great new programs and resources in the traditional service delivery with competitive integrated employment, paid internship programs and competitive integrated employment incentives, which actually put some money behind the philosophy and principle that employment should be a priority for our population. And I think those things, if included in a traditional service delivery, might carry over in a self-determination budget calculation. But someone transitioning right from school, never having had job supports, looking at self-determination program, that would be a change in their life circumstances. So we'd again be doing that sort of hypothetical calculation of what would be spent to support that person in achieving their goals based on rates of traditional services that would have been put in place.
Good, thank you, Herman.
So I have another follow-up question, well, another question altogether, which is when we first thought about day programs, you know, this was back before the HCBS rule was anywhere near close to implementation. And we were concerned about that whole segregation thing that was occurring with them. And maybe you can just give me a sense of what kinds of changes, Catherine, you might have seen at day programs, not necessarily one day program in particular I mean, I think that would also help me understand how service providers in general are really modifying their approach to be more inclusive.
Yeah, I'll give you some examples from some providers I've worked with that have received some funding to make some updates for their services. So DDS has had $15 million from the state budget every year since 2016 for the past few years now towards updating services for people to come into compliance with these requirements. So providers have had to submit an application to DDS saying this is where we've got some challenges, this is our proposal, this is how much it would cost. So we have had several different kinds of proposals that have been pretty effective. And one of the things that has been small but powerful, I mean small in scope, is purchasing a vehicle, you know, specifically a vehicle with a wheelchair lift to provide access to take people away from the site to go to places in the community. And a lot of services have been designed around it's all going to take place at the setting. And we're not thinking about going out to do different things. Or maybe we want to, but there's limited access if we don't have a lot of vehicles or there's not great access to public transportation, that kind of thing. So we had an art program that I worked with where all of the art instruction was taking place on site. We're artists, we're doing our painting, we're doing our projects. And it was like, there was just no concept of what could we even do outside of these four walls. It was such a challenge. I mean, it was so established. And they were awarded 2 vehicles. And with that, they started planning trips and talking to the participants about where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do. And there's a lot of things art related that you can do outside of 4 walls. People started going to the supply store to buy their art supplies. It's not staff going to buy paint, it's the participants going to buy paint. They were going to art galleries to look at other artists and learn about art. They were going out to the park and doing the plein air, you know, natural painting outside. They started doing volunteer work in addition to art. So now they're expanding the scope of the things that they're doing. And there was just this contagious enthusiasm that started taking place. And I really love it because they were very honest. At first, some people would say, you know, I don't want to go out. Like, this is what I do. I stay here all day. Or maybe I sign up for a trip and then the day of, oh no, I cancel. I'm not sure about that. I don't feel up to it today. And it might be months where they see other peers going out and having good experiences. Okay, I'll give it a try. And now people's worlds are opening up beyond those 4 walls. And there were good reports about the staff seeing people learning and growing in new ways. And that was motivating for the staff that were employed there. So it's really cool just to see how even having those conversations started bigger things happening. There was another art program, a different one, also art related, that was also all on site within the 4 walls, you know, segregated kind of environment. And they said, we don't know, honestly, how we could incorporate this with our current structure. So we're going to, you know, say goodbye to that one and say hello to something that's totally brand new, which is an art studio for working artists that is open to the public. So a lot of the same participants, a lot of the same artists, but with a real focus now on, I'm a working artist. I'm creating my portfolio. I'm preparing for gallery shows. I'm selling my work online. And stationed in, public areas. There's other members of the public coming in and taking workshops along with them. So it really became a truly integrated setting of art for the whole community rather than, a specific center just for people with disabilities. So really cool to see that creativity there. We've seen a work activity program, which is kind of a sheltered employment situation that was phased out and replaced with a job training program designed to launch people into independent placement, employment in the community. We've seen people bring on staff that are community connectors. So sometimes it's not that we're not willing, but we don't know where to go or we don't know what to do. You need to have that face-to-face contact to set up that volunteer partnership, right? To have someone to go out there and set those up and do those kinds of things. We've had a lot of people do person-centered thinking, training, and not just getting trained, but getting staff certified to continue giving that training on an ongoing basis. So that person-centered planning is spreading throughout our organization. We've had some bigger employment agencies that have traditionally done a lot of on-site shelter workshops or group employment that have added a lot of training, job clubs, job exploration, really preparing people for independent placement for community work. So a lot of changes that have been happening. So those are a few examples for you.
Looks like
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah. Looks like we've got a hand raised. Not sure if that was intentional. Margot, if you'd like to unmute yourself. Did you have a question to ask?
Yes. So 2 quick questions. First
Sure.
one, just curious, in terms of, are you able to define community in terms of scope? Like, is there a limit of how far these services are located from the client, like radius, or is it nationwide, or is there
42.3 miles. No, I mean, I think that's a good question.
Let's say there's a program that's really unique that's only available in New York or, I don't know, Florida. I mean, would they be limited by parameters of mileage or distance?
So the definition of community in Title 17 is not in an institution, basically. So we're looking for community experiences. So that could be place, it might be your neighborhood, it might be your city, it might be the people that you interact with, right? It might be your church community. I love photography, so if I meet another photographer, it's like, oh, we've got community because we're talking about lenses and f-stops and shutter speed and all of that. So as far as a move like to New York, if someone's passion is to live in New York, maybe they want to move to New York. Maybe we can talk about how to support them to do that. I mean, I wouldn't put that off the table for sure. It's going to be complicated because we're talking about different systems in California system and moving to New York. I don't have a streamlined way to tell you how to do that. But I think keeping those dreams alive and talking about, well, what is important to you? What's so great about New York? What is it in New York that would meet your need better than what you see here in California? So is there something that we can find here that would meet that need in a similar way? Or, is that something where you might move to New York to pursue that dream? That's something that I don't see with a lot of regional center clients. A lot of times people are stationed, around where they have grown up or where the services are. But, I've moved, and as a lot of my friends and family, I've moved where I've lived to be closer to jobs, and I've changed jobs to be closer to where I lived. So it kind of depends on, what my goals are, what my needs are, and, what I want to see in the future. So when I'm talking about goals with planning teams, we a lot of times write these IPP goals just for this next year, but it's also helpful to talk about those long-term goals as well. Maybe if I want to live in New York in 10 years from now, maybe I'm not ready today. I'm happy here today. This is great. This is awesome. But 10 years from now, if I'm not in New York, I'm not going to be living my dream. What things need to happen between now and then that will lead me to that outcome? What kind of training do I need? What experience do I need? What kind of help do I need? And how can we be putting that together to be taking steps in that direction?
I apologize. I should have been more specific in terms of not just group homes or HCBS type of services, but an overall self-determination type of services. You know, like let's say there's something available that's kind of outside your immediate community, but you still like to be part of it, whether it's an online service or just something that you're just going to do on the weekends. That's what I meant, not so much the residential portion of it. Does that make sense? I was more along the lines of just in terms of the types of services you would be receiving if you went over to self-determination. Like, what would they cover if it's still within your community?
I think the idea is that the services would be promoting the individual's ability to participate in their community, however they define that. And feel free to jump in, everybody else as well. As far as the online services you mentioned, you know, we've been incorporating online support now during COVID, and we've got kind of this very unusual situation that we're in with alternate services. Traditionally, we've had an expectation of face-to-face support. I don't know if that's something DDS is going to ask us to go back to, or if there's going to be hybrid models or what that's going to look like at some point. So just be aware. We're kind of in COVID time right now with the online stuff. So I would be surprised, honestly, if it all did go away, because a lot of people are finding value in that. But we've historically had that face-to-face requirement for services. So just for you to know.
Okay, and second question, just in terms of rolling out training for the case managers, are they already getting information with regards to self-determination? Because I think the very last slide of the orientation was the next steps being reach out to your case manager, let them know that you want to make a move to the program, or at least get going on the meeting to discuss the IPP and whatnot, or person-centered planning. And I did that. As soon as I completed the orientation, I emailed my case manager, and she replied something to the effect that you have more information than I do. And I told her, maybe you should reach out to Herman. He's the contact person I have listed here, because it looks like they're rolling this out. I mean, from what I heard from other parents is this June or July. So I would think she would have already had something, and she would have got the ball rolling and, you know, setting a time to meet with me, but she doesn't have information. So that's a little concerning.
Yeah, that's concerning.
And I do want to say that is concerning, and I appreciate that feedback, and I've written it down. But I also want you to know that with the rollout of SDP, with the first group of participants, we did assign specific service coordinators as SDP service coordinators, because we wanted to have some within units that we could look to as our subject matter experts. And so now with the new rolling out, we have implemented internal trainings, and so possibly that's something that we need to revisit a little bit stronger within our agency. So I do appreciate that feedback, and I do apologize for your service coordinator, because there's a lot of information that we have shared with service coordinators. So that is something that I can make sure agency-wide that we send out information. We advise service coordinators to ask questions if they don't know, especially to the other service coordinators who now have been doing it for a few years. And so that is something that we can take away from this to do better on our end.
So how do I make my intent noted? Do I need to reach out to those coordinators specifically that already did the trial group and not my own, or just keep waiting? I think
it's great that you started the discussion, because that is something that, you know, once SDP is available to everybody, that is the process that it will start with your service coordinator. So and I don't know if you want to, I can put my email in the chat if you would like to share with me who your service coordinator is, because then I can specifically follow up with just making sure that they're getting the information and being able to share it with you.
Okay.
Well, I could
That'd be
also
great.
suggest that there's a self-determination website and on Alta's website, and there's a self-determination advisory committee meeting that happens every couple of months. And there are constant trainings also that are occurring. But if anyone can attend remotely those self-determination advisory committee meetings, and you can learn a lot more about folks who are partway through the program. And, where just issues that come up with the, lots of Q&A also going on at the same time.
Oh, yes, right. I've signed up for most of everything that's going to be for the next 6 weeks. But I mean, the literal first step they tell us is to reach out to our coordinator, and they are without information to continue the process. So I feel that's just a huge roadblock right there. So that's why I wanted to bring that up.
Karen, I
Okay,
just
thank you.
that Margot is a personal friend of mine, and so she does
Hey,
know.
Kidada.
She knows more than she's letting on, but her concern is that not what she knows, but what her service coordinator knows. So that's where her little issue comes in, but we still have time, right? So we still have time. So I'm like, just take it all in, learn as much as you can. But it is concerning because I love my daughter's service coordinator, and I think, I always tell her she should be training other service coordinators, because when I hear horror stories, I cringe, and she's been nothing like that. And she has been eager to learn more. She did say that they were having other trainings, and she's going to speak to her supervisor. So I kind of let her know everything that I've learned. So she's, abreast. She's keeping abreast of all of the changes that are happening, outside of regional center. And then I guess she'll tie it all in together with everything that she learns at the regional center. But yeah, the service coordinators do need to be on board. It's not the first time that I've had a family say that they were interested and they wanted to do more. They have done the orientation, or they're about to do the orientation. But when they mention it to the service coordinator, that's where the worry comes in, because then the service coordinator is like, well, I don't know what you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So then they're discouraged, because if the service coordinator doesn't know, then who am I going, that's the person that I need to kind of, that's the bridge, that's the person to kind of connect me to this. And we kind of need them to be on board.
Yeah, great.
That is helpful.
Great
feedback.
input, thank you.
Yeah. And I want to make sure we get to all the hands that are raised. Jennifer has been waiting patiently.
Thank you. I think it kind of goes along the lines of what Margot was saying, is do the services that you want to have for your child have to be in the ACRC catchment area? So if my child wants to move to, say, Mendocino, would we have to change to another regional center for her to have services in that catchment area? What is the process? Because my child is a beach child.
So staying within the confines of California certainly makes the answer a little easier. Eligibility does transfer across regional centers across the state. Once eligible for one regional center, eligibility transfers across the state. Would you have to transfer from Alta to the catchment area that your daughter lived if she relocated? There are different arrangements that can be made by regional centers, shared case management with different fiscal responsibilities. And ordinarily it makes sense in the traditional service delivery that if somebody physically relocates, that case would transfer, because you'd be accessing services that would be vendored by that regional center in that geographic area. With self-determination, because everything's funded through the FMS, I could see the lines getting blurred a little bit there. And that would probably be a really individualized, case-specific decision as to which regional center holds a case when a SDP client relocates. For those who are were lucky enough to be selected in the initial rollout, not only does regional center eligibility transfer across state, but that SDP eligibility for the initial rollout also follows that person if they relocate. But I'm guessing that doesn't apply to anyone in this group, since these are all people interested in the expansion of the program.
So are you saying that we should be looking at services within the ACRC catchment area then?
Would you be, did you say would you be limited to services in the ACRC catchment area?
Correct.
No, I wouldn't think so. I think purchasing services out of state, that was the interesting question. I think one we'll have to put in our parking lot because I'm not sure what rules apply to that. I think it applies in SDP in general, whether in the rollout or starting in June. Was Sonia's response. Meaning, yeah, I would think if you initiate SDP services in one regional center's catchment area, and then you physically relocate to another regional center, that budget follows you, that IPP follows you, and case transfers, as much as we try to make seamless, there's always some disruption when people uproot and physically relocate. But the way the law is written says the receiving regional center will honor the sending regional center's IPP and initiate comparable services. And usually that's because you aren't able to find the exact same vendor who was identified in the IPP. But SDP is going to open up a whole new world of how those transfers work, in that regional centers aren't funding the service. Regional centers are just funding the FMS, and the FMS is funding the service. And FMSs do have vendorizations with multiple regional centers. So that service provider wouldn't necessarily have to change just because somebody physically moved from one area to another.
Yeah, I would have a hard time seeing anyone being told the service has to take place within these 10 counties. You know, we are, you know, a certain region in the state, but let's say you live in Davis and you find the perfect day program in Vacaville. It's not that far of a drive, and it's going to be closer than, you know, some of the others that are in the ACRC catchment area. So if that's what works best, that's something you can arrange, you know, with your team. If you're going to be moving residents to somewhere that's, you know, more distant county like Mendocino, I would just urge you to consider the value of having a service coordinator in Mendocino that would be available for those face-to-face visits and is knowledgeable of the resources in Mendocino, you know, what's available there, because probably most of our service coordinators here are not quite familiar with that area. So just some things to consider.
Some good questions. Margot's hand is still up. Jennifer's hand is still up. I'm going to confirm. I think Sin put something in the chat. Not sure if that was addressed already or not, but your hand is up. So I'll give the floor to Sin if she has something to add with the question. Or
yeah, thank you. It is just the chat question. I just wanted to try and get an answer for the chat question that we signed up for the lottery, you know, 3 years ago and didn't get selected. Do we still need to let our SC know again that we're interested?
yes, that would be the next step. And hopefully your service coordinator will be able
Yeah.
to advise you that it's not immediately available, but that doesn't mean you can't begin this information gathering and some of the important decisions that are able to be made as far as initiating services. They aren't things that happen in sequential order is what we're finding, and lots of things can be happening concurrently. And some of the things that you can do in advance to prepare, if you've already completed the orientation, you know, the selection of the FMS is a big decision. They're an important partner and support in the program. There are probably about half a dozen options available to you. You can begin interviewing in advance of, you wouldn't be able to initiate a purchase or generate a budget yet, but you could sort of begin getting to know some of those providers that would be essential in moving forward with the program.
Okay.
That would be my
So there
advice.
won't be any kind of waiting list, like it's going to be open to everyone in June?
There will be no waiting list.
Okay. It just opens up to everybody in June, and then you just start your IPPs. I'm sure they're all going to be really busy starting their IPPs all in June or July. Okay, thank you.
Got another question from Nancy Marsh. So who should we direct our service coordinator to if they don't know what to do next?
I would say their manager. And if their manager is scratching their head, they have an associate director, one of each, who is participating weekly in these FAQs with the intent of getting the word out to the community. And that would include our staff, who we hope would be equally, if not more informed than the public on this, to advise and direct them on next steps.
And I appreciate you sharing that information as well, because that my takeaway will be to make sure that we are communicating with our managers and service coordinators that if they continue to have questions about SDP, that they need to reach out, they need to, just ask questions on our end versus saying to a parent, you know more than I do. So I appreciate that feedback, because we need to do a better job then in giving them the tools and the resources to check in on that information. We have inundated service coordinators with a mass amount of emails during COVID, not making excuses, but we have had a lot of changes and directives from the DDS. And so, we just need to make sure that they're keeping up on all of the information in regards to SDP as well. So.
I just want to chime in and echo that as one of the managers. I would be happy to hear from any parent, any client that needs more information, and help get my service coordinators if they happen to feel like they don't have that information. We are actively working on training about this, and it's coming. So we all need to be ready for it. And also most of our managers are including in our team meetings a little bit of chunks of information about SDP as we get nearer to this. So there's really no excuse right now. So for us not to know this, so definitely reach out to a manager if you need to.
And it looks like Nancy may have raised her hand.
Yes, thank you. I just want to clarify, is there actually a start date, a hard start date for this to occur? I don't know if I missed something in that regard.
So we have ongoing meetings with the DDS, and we have most recently been told, because there's been 2 dates that have gone out. There's been June 7th and there's been July 1. And they do not have a confirmation on which date it will be. That was the last, we did ask that at the last meeting. So hopefully we will be hearing exactly which date that will be soon.
And so other than speaking with our service coordinator, who I hope will be a little more on board with what's happening, I mean, what do we need to do in prep? I mean, I don't have, as far as I am aware, an IPP. My son's 16, so I don't even know if he qualifies for having that if he receives services in school, which he doesn't because we're homeschooled, but I'm not quite clear on what I should be ready to do to make sure that we are part of this.
Okay, definitely talk with your service coordinator, but and if he is regional center, he should have an individual program plan currently, and that would definitely be something you would want to start talking to the service coordinator about and reviewing. We also statement of services for all of our clients. And so that would, and actually in your case, you said he has not had any services. He's just remained eligible. So, but it's good to start having the discussion with the service coordinator, and as well as what you're doing now in, you know, attending the orientation, becoming familiar with the SDP process, and what the requirements are. And so as the date gets closer, then there will be, and I saw there's a question from Judy in the chat, if you've already had an IPP, then will there be another IPP when self-determination starts? Yes, you would go through the person-centered plan and then the meet to have the individual program plan based on what was developed in the person-centered plan as well.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any hands raised or any other questions in the chat. And we have gone past the scheduled hour, which is fine. Just wanting to check and confirm if anybody has any other questions, and confirmation that Margot was able to get Tracy's email contact out of the chat for follow-up.
Sure, I just wanted to add, I just put my email address in the chat in case any HCBS specific questions come up. I definitely would love to connect with you.
And I was going to say, I know Margot was the one who asked for it, but you all have it. So if there's any questions for me, please feel free to reach out, or if you know, you need to know who your service coordinator's manager is, I can provide you that as well. So